The biggest problem that people have is not that they don't know what to do or how to move their life forward. It's that they do, but for some reason, there's this force that's keeping them from doing it. It's called the resistance. It's why you can never start your essay right away or finish that report. It creates this cycle of procrastination that seems almost impossible to break. And that might be you, the chronic procrastinator, someone who always seems to have an excuse to push something off. I've read tons of productivity books and self-help books, and the main theme is that procrastination is actually the biggest thing standing between the current life that you have and the life that you want. But here's the even crazier part. You're not alone. 95% of people actually claim to be some form of a procrastinator. So I think there's an opportunity right there for everyone to just be better. When I got to thinking on this topic, I realized that there are 3 bulletproof steps that I take to beat procrastination every single time. And my promise to you is that they're not flattering, they aren't sexy, but they get the job done. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through how to finally cure that procrastination habit that's holding you back. The first step in this process is not flattering, but it's what I like to call a hard brain reset. According to Tim Pychyl, author and former professor at Carleton University, procrastination is an emotional response to things that we don't want to do that actually cause us to put them off. And in his book, which I highly recommend you guys should all read, he talks about the 7 triggers, which are boredom, frustration, difficulty, ambiguity, lacking in structure, non-rewarding, and lacking in personal meaning. The biggest one of those 7, however, is boredom. And that's why it's so easy to just pick up your phone and get distracted when you're doing something that you don't really want to do. And this is where step 1 comes into place. To do a hard brain reset, all I want you to do is take a walk outside without your headphones or devices and just let your brain recenter. This will help you disconnect from that rewarding cycle of dopamine that you get from scrolling on TikTok. Personally, for me, when I really want to focus on a task, it's hard to do that once I've scrolled a little too far on TikTok. So giving my brain the space to just disconnect from those activities has always been a really useful strategy for me. This is just about creating that transition from procrastination to doing the work. I don't ever recommend that you spend more than 10 to 15 minutes in this transitory space. Transitory? I don't know. But don't spend more than 10 to 15 minutes on this actual walk, because the work itself is the most important part. But you might be wondering, does this just mean that we're procrastinating more? And the answer is yes and no. See, when you're procrastinating, it's typically because you don't feel motivated to do your work. So when you exercise, or in this case, go on your walk, you're increasing your heart rate, which releases dopamine naturally. When I get back from my quick 10-minute walk, it's easy for me to slip into that state of flow because now I'm excited to do the work and I'm ready. This leads me into step 2, which is to prioritize your work and create a plan. When we have a list of things that we need to do, but no clear direction or plan of attack on how to do them, then it's hard to know where to start. This makes it so much easier for us to just do nothing because it'll create a sense of anxiety. I listen to a lot of stuff, but the best definition that I've ever heard for anxiety is it's created when there's a lots of things to do, but no direction on what to do first. So when I sit down to actually get some work done, I always make it a point to try and get into a deep flow state. But the only way you can do that is if you know exactly what you're gonna work on. This is where things like time blocking comes into play. This is where things like having a priorities list comes into play. The way that I get over this hurdle is just by ranking the things that I need to work on in order from highest to lowest priority. And this just helps us get started. The next question is, how do I keep going? This is a little bit of science, but everyone has a different level of resistance depending on the task. So when you're faced with a task that you're resistant to, I recommend chunking it down to a level that you're less resistant to. For example, if you know that you need to read for an hour, but that just seems too unpleasant for you in the moment, could you do it for 30 minutes? Could you read for 15? The point is to do anything in your power to just get started and build momentum. Momentum is what's going to carry you through this trough of procrastination. Once you get the ball rolling, it's hard to stop it, but the hardest part is that initial push to get the ball rolling. A strategy that works for me often is just by keeping the rewards and consequences top of mind. This is what creates that attractive light at the end of the tunnel. When thinking about the 7 triggers of procrastination, we kind of have to use the inverse. So how do we make something less boring or less ambiguous or less frustrating? These are all factors that speak to the attractiveness of the task. You're more likely to do things that bring you joy. So the more that we can wrap that task in this attractive, gift wrap, the better it will be for you. The third and final piece to finally curing your procrastination habit is what I like to call white room. So this is the most important piece of this entire puzzle. If you don't do this, you're likely still gonna procrastinate. So lock in for a second. Interestingly enough, there was a study done by Timothy Wilson. He's a professor at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and it yielded some pretty cool results. So basically, he took a group of undergrad college students and he ran 2 tests. When they got to the testing site, they were told to remove their belongings and put it in a cubby somewhere and enter a room with nothing in it. It was literally like a white room. Half the participants were given prompts to think about during that time, while the other half were just forced to sit in silence and think. 50% of the people who either took test A or B reported that they were bored and preferred doing other stuff like listening to music. And this is where it takes the twist. So as kind of like a Hail Mary, they brought back those same participants to the site. Instead, this time, the only thing in the room was a button that they could press to mini electrocute themselves. And the results were shocking. There was no pun intended for that, I promise. 67% of the men and 25% of the women actually chose to electrocute themselves as opposed to sitting in silence. So this study shows that when you're left in a room with only one thing to do, then you are more likely to do that thing. This last step, white room, is about removing any distractions from your workspace. So turn off your phone. Put it in a different room. Do anything in your power to have only one thing in front of you, which is the work itself. This is the hardest but most effective step in this process. The key to this is to make your external surroundings so incredibly boring that the work itself seems fun. There is one guy who took this to an ultimate extreme. His name was Eric Arthur Blair, but you probably know him as his pen name, which is George Orwell. He wrote like Animal Farm in 1984, like 2 very pivotal books back in his time. After his wife just suddenly died, his best friend and editor basically told him that he should move to a secluded Scottish island in a 4-bedroom farmhouse. Oddly enough, the farmhouse didn't have electricity, it didn't have any access to telephone, it didn't have a post office, so the only thing he could do was write. During this period of his life, he was also dying due to tuberculosis, but he still managed to write 4,000 words per day, 7 days a week. The level of dedication eventually killed him, but there's something to be learned in this. When I'm in periods where I really need to lock in, I'll go as far as to change my environment free from all the stuff in my apartment. Those days, even though they aren't sexy, they get me the closest to my goal. And I'm gonna be real with you guys for a second. If you want to do something big in your life, you don't have time to procrastinate. When we're young, we think that we have all the time in the world, but you don't realize that every year time moves faster and faster. Your goals are waiting and all you need to do is start. So many of you say that you want to do big things, but you procrastinate. And those 2 things are mutually exclusive. You can't be a procrastinator and work towards a goal. Procrastination is the biggest obstacle standing between your current life and the life that you want. And so if you can actually take these steps, you can finally cure that horrible disease. All you have to do is disconnect, prioritize your work, and remove all distractions. To be honest, it took me far too long to create this system around procrastination, but now I hope it can serve you.